So Eddy Reynoso slams the door shut on the Chris Eubank Jr. fight. Says it is a fight that Chris Eubank Jr. will never get. He will never get the opportunity to fight Canelo. Now, obviously, earlier in the week, it was reported that preliminary talks had begun between Chris Eubank Jr. and Canelo Alvarez. I think it was Ben Shalom that was saying it's a fight that could happen in England, especially if Canelo has that desire to fight in England. It could be a fight that potentially happens at Wembley. Chris Eubank Jr. is a big name in England, and Canelo is one of the faces of boxing, so of course that fight would sell. And it would be interesting. I think, as you've seen with Canelo's recent pick of opponents, he's really picking and choosing what he wants to do. I think this is a guy that I don't think that Canelo is completely over the hill. I don't think that by any stretch. And I think you saw a lot of good moments, especially in that Munguia fight. I think he's still got a lot to offer the sport of boxing, but he really is picking and choosing. Kind of almost what Floyd did at the end of his career. Floyd chose to fight Conor McGregor. He also was doing some of those exhibitions. Pacquiao's been doing a similar thing. And I think if Canelo does want a new experience, then potentially that fight could happen. It's a fight where obviously Chris Eubank Jr. is a 160-pounder. We've seen Canelo bring up guys like Jermell Charlo from a couple weight classes. So I guess you could make it work. I think the only other fight that potentially could make some sense would be a Terence Crawford. But even that fight, to me, it doesn't make much sense because I think it was only a year ago that Crawford was fighting at 147. He's moving up 3 weight classes to fight against a guy that's got power and is one of the best at 168. So that fight never really made much sense to me, other than really it's just a good payday for Crawford to finish his career with. I don't see him getting anywhere near Canelo Alvarez in that fight if it were to happen. So I suppose if you look at it from that point of view, a Chris Eubank Jr. fight maybe could make sense. If you look at that 160 to 168 pound division, guys like Janabek, Carlos Adames, and Billy, they're just not big names. And, you know, they're not really big names that are really going to bring in that revenue. So I don't see Canelo fighting that type of opponent. And I think if he was to fight Chris Eubank Jr. as well, I think that would be a pretty routine victory, and he would probably stop Chris Eubank Jr. I would say middle rounds. Now, really, I want to get into Chris Eubank Jr. in this video because I think the Chris Eubank Jr. story is a very interesting one. I think this is a guy that really always had potential. I think if you looked at the first loss of his career against Billy Joe Saunders, he really lost that fight, in my opinion, due to inexperience and poor tactics. And I really thought that he was going to come on strong and learn from that. He then lost in a similar fashion to George Groves. And after that Groves fight, he did start to make some changes. He obviously brought in Nate Vasquez for the James DeGale fight. He finally brought in a full-time trainer that was there with him. And Nate Vasquez will teach you the fundamentals. He'll teach you the fundamentals of boxing. He'll get you in shape, and he'll tell you what it is. And I think that's what Chris Eubank Jr. did need. And actually, it was with Nate Vasquez that Chris Eubank Jr. got the biggest win of his career against James DeGale. At 28 years of age, I think we were finally starting to see some positive changes in the career of Chris Eubank Jr. But from then, it really never materialized. I mean, I think since that fight against James DeGale, he's never really pushed on. And since then, I mean, look, he's had 3 or 4 warm-up fights. 3 or 4 warm-up fights, got knocked out by Liam Smith. Obviously won that rematch in good fashion. But, you know, I know now everyone's talking about the Conor Ben fight. And what does that fight really mean? It's not for a world title. Yeah, the casuals in England will get behind it and the general public because of the fathers and they were big names, obviously, when they were fighting. But other than that, I mean, what does that really do for Chris Eubank Jr.'s career other than get him a good payday? I think this is a guy that, you know, should really have ambitions at 35 years of age of winning a world title, because you only get one career. And is the Conor Ben fight good preparation for a potential Canelo fight in May? I don't think so. I don't think it is. And, you know, I really was not impressed with Chris Eubank Jr.'s performance in Saudi. I think that he was throwing the uppercut from a mile away. I think he was making some real poor mistakes in that. I think he was getting hit by a guy that he shouldn't be getting hit by. I think his right hand was way too low. And I think even against Conor Benn, I mean, when Chris Eubank Jr. is in his prime, I think that's a convincing victory. But I think even at 160, I think Chris is weight drained a little bit. So I think that makes that Conor Benn fight a bit more of a 50-50. It does make it more competitive in my opinion, because I really have not seen much improvements from Chris. Obviously, he's with Jonathan Banks now. And is Jonathan Banks really a guy that's going to get the best out of Chris? I'm not sure. I would have much rather preferred to see Chris Eubank Jr. once again back with Nate Vasquez, because, like I said, I think that was the best performance of Chris's career. And he's a proper coach, Nate Vasquez. You know, he will teach you the fundamentals of boxing. You know, keep your hands up and really get Chris to focus on what he's good at. He's an athletic fighter. He's a strong fighter. He's got heart. And, you know, focus on those fundamentals. So I actually really would have liked to see that partnership continue, especially because it got you the best win of your career. Eddy Reynoso has slammed that fight, said it's never going to happen. Obviously, this is boxing. Things are said. If you look at, you know, fights like Pacquiao and Mayweather, all parties said that fight was never going to happen. But money talks. So if next May, if that is the best potential option for Canelo Alvarez, if he doesn't decide to go down the Terence Crawford route, I think that's a fight that could potentially happen with Chris Eubank Jr., especially if he does, you know, want that experience of fighting in England. I think with a guy like Canelo who's had 60 professional fights, what are you really doing it for? And a new experience like fighting in England, especially with the British fight fans, could be something he's interested in. So I wouldn't shut this fight down immediately. Obviously, you know, Eddy Reynoso has made those bold claims. But I think this is a fight that we could see in 2025 potentially. If it does happen, like I said, I do believe Canelo is a very overwhelming favorite. But who knows? Because look, when Chris Eubank Jr. was in his prime, he was one of my favorite fighters. You know, hopefully he can get back to that level. So, you know, let's see what Chris Eubank Jr. does from here. I think we're all expecting the Conor Benn fight to happen towards the beginning of 2025. But let's see what he decides to do after that fight. Is it going to go for a world title, or will he move up to 168 pounds and fight Canelo Alvarez?